We're back on Asia now, and we're joined by Australian Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles. Mr. Marles, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Firstly, you've met with the Chinese Defence Minister at this Defence Summit, in which you describe it as a good meeting. How do you envision this dialogue affecting Australia-China relations moving forward?
Well, we were very pleased with the meeting that we had with Minister Dong. I mean, we raised a lot of topics. It was frank, and there are obviously difficult issues that we have to traverse, but we did traverse them. And in doing so, recalled that it was really 2 years ago at the Shangri-La Dialogue when ministerial contact between our two countries resumed, when I had a meeting with Minister Dong's predecessor. And since then, we've come a long way, actually, in stabilising the relationship with China. But it is a complex relationship. I mean, there are we talk about cooperating where we can and disagreeing where we must. There is much we can cooperate on, which includes trade, for example, and Premier Lee will be visiting Australia in a couple of weeks' time, and trade will be a big part of that visit. But there are obviously security anxieties that we feel as well, and we need to speak clearly about them, and we're pleased that we're able to do that, and to do that in the form of the dialogue that we were able to have with Minister Dong yesterday.
And talking about security concerns, following the recent military skirmish involving an Australian surveillance aircraft and a Chinese fighter jet over the Yellow Sea, how is Australia balancing its national security concerns with the need to maintain peace with China? Are there any specific steps, perhaps, in terms of reducing the risk of incidents such as the recent skirmish?
Well, again, I mean, the first thing we've got to do is be very clear in our voice, and use Australia's national interests as our guide. And so we will always speak up when there are incidents. And if that does mean that we are raising difficult issues in the context of China, we will. And if it does mean that we have differences with China, well, then that's how it is. And that doesn't preclude us seeking to move forward in other aspects of the relationship, but it is about being very clear in the voice that we use. I think at a more practical level, what we were talking about in our meeting with Minister Dong yesterday was to try and improve or elevate, if I could put it that way, the defence dialogue that we have between Australia and China. We would like to see it get back to the place that it was at prior to the breakdown in relationships a few years ago. And there was a very positive sense, I think, on both sides to move forward in improving the defence dialogue. Again, that's not going to mediate all our differences, and neither side expects that. But what it does do is enable both sides to have a much greater understanding of the operational behaviours of our militaries, and through that understanding, you genuinely do reduce the risk of a misunderstanding. And that, I think, is a practical, important step in terms of how we can move forward. And as I say, we were both very positive about that as an outcome of our meeting yesterday and how we can move that forward.
Now, given the current geopolitical tensions in the Asia-Pacific region, what role do you see Australia playing in promoting stability and security?
Well, firstly, the point we would make is that when we analyse Australia's national security interests, and when we think about the geography of Australia's national security, it lies far less on the border of our country, on the coastline of our continent, and really it lies here. And by that I mean it is fundamental to Australia's national security that we live within a region which is itself peaceful and secure. The security of Southeast Asia is utterly essential to the security of Australia. And so we want to make we see our fundamental purpose really in terms of the role of the Defence Force and the activities that we undertake. We see it as us making our contribution to the collective security of the region in which we live. And that's really how we have been describing our strategic intent when we've met with ASEAN countries, but other countries here at the Shangri-La Dialogue. And I think that intent is obviously welcomed, and it's backed up. Well, it's backed up by an improved capability that we're investing in terms of our military technology, but it is backed up by a much bigger or deeper level of relationships at a defence level that we have with countries in the region. And, from here in Singapore, but Indonesia, Philippines, Japan, Korea, we are, and there are more countries as well, where we are deepening our defence relationships and increasing the rate of exercises. And that, I think, gives expression to our strategic intent of contributing to the collective security of this region.
Now, earlier on, you talk about trade. Now, military tensions can have significant repercussions on trade and diplomatic relations. How do these military tensions impact Australia's trade and diplomatic efforts with China, and what steps are being taken to mitigate any negative effects?
Well, again, it's a good question, and it's complex, and there's no kind of hiding the complexity of this. It's why when we came to power 2 years ago, we felt that what made no sense was to have a situation where there was barely any contact between Australia and China at all, and that whilst the relationship is complex, what we needed to do was bring stability back to it, and that's what we have sought to do. And that doesn't mean not speaking out when we have issues that we need to say or where we disagree. We continue to do that, but it is to also say that in doing that, we'll always be respectful, we'll always be professional, but we also see that there is another dimension to our relationship. I mean, China has, throughout this period, been and is right now our largest trading partner. Obviously, China matters to Australia, and we value the most productive relationship that we can have with China, and we want to move forward on the basis of trying to sincerely improve that. And so I think it is just trying to bring that intent to the relationship. That's how we stabilise it. Stabilising the relationship in turn, I think, means that we can deal with the tensions on the one hand, but the opportunities that come from increased trade on the other. And so far, we've been able to progress down that path.
Now, Mr. Marles, what has been the highlight for you at this Shangri-La Dialogue in its objective of enhancing peace and stability in the region?
Well, one of the things about this dialogue is it is a great place to build personal relationships. The American Secretary of Defence, Lloyd, with whom I've become close friends, actually, I first met here at a meeting of the Shangri-La Dialogue. And as I said, even if you think about our relationship with China, it was renewed really in that first meeting that I had with my counterpart here, and have subsequently met with my Chinese counterparts, including obviously Admiral Dong at this meeting today. So I think, or yesterday I should say, that it is the personal relationships that come from the Shangri-La Dialogue, which I think is the magic of this meeting. So I guess in that spirit, somebody who I've become very close with and who is very wise is the Singaporean Defence Minister, and maybe the highlight was when I first saw him on Friday. I felt the need to give him a hug. I did. I managed to spill his coffee in the process, so I had a diplomatic faux pas within my first 10 seconds of this year's Shangri-La Dialogue, but renewing my acquaintance with is perhaps the highlight.
Great story to share there. Thank you very much for that. We've been speaking to Australian Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles.